One of the things I've always thought was kind of unusual about trying to select something in order to ultimately make a mask out of it is that the way that Photoshop shows us our selection is with this flashing line, this selection edge, which some people refer to as the marching ants. Now the problem is, even if I zoom in pretty far, I want to really check and see how is my edge doing. Did I do a good selection? It's almost like you can't tell until you do something else. For example, if I, with this area selected, if I press Command or Control J, it'll put that selected area up on its own layer. I can hide the background and now see how good it looks. Unfortunately, then you start to notice things you didn't do such a good job on, and you have to kind of go back a couple of steps. I'm going to undo to go back here. So that presents a bit of a challenge. Well, that's where this little button down here called Quick Mask can really be beneficial. It's actually a form of mask, speaking of masks, but as the name suggests, it's kind of temporary. It doesn't actually save a permanent mask. But what it does is it changes our display. And there's a couple of different ways of getting in and out of Quick Mask. You can either click on this button right here, it goes into Quick Mask mode and back out again, or just press the letter Q for Quick Mask, which is my favorite way since I don't have to move over there and click on it. You can also, by the way, go into the Select menu and do it there as well. That's probably the longest way. And look what it does. Here's my marching ants or flashing edge. When I press Q for Quick Mask, it replaces it with this mask. And the way that it works is my selection I still see in color. Anything that's not selected, therefore masked, has this colored overlay. And by default, it's red. And what it does is it fairly clearly shows you any areas that might be a problem. So I'm going to go back, well, here's one here, for example. This part of this little ribbon on the back of her dress should be selected, and it currently isn't. You can tell it because it has red over it. By the same token, this area of the sidewalk shouldn't be selected, and it is. So I should see red over that. There's red over her shoe. So what this lets us do is a couple things. First of all, it just lets us see how we're doing. So at any time during this selection procedure, you can always just go into Quick Mask and see how it looks. And I find I do this quite often, especially as I think I'm nearing the completion. I think I have a selection that looks pretty good. It makes me notice things that I might otherwise not, like this little area here and this area here. You know, just shows you things that you can see a lot easier. Now, what you could do is go out of Quick Mask and then use some of the fine-tuning methods we're going to talk about shortly to fix it, or you can fix it in Quick Mask and using methods that involve paint. So let me show you what this looks like. Remember we briefly talked about a mask before, and we said a mask looks like this. Mask is black and white. Well, that's what Quick Mask really is. It's still a black and white mask. The difference is it's just kind of temporary. It goes away very quickly. So with that in mind, here's how it works. Look over in my channels palette. Let's actually stay in this area right here and zoom in one little notch here, like on her shoe. You can see that the area that's selected is white and the area that's masked is black, similar to other parts of masking. So if I take my paintbrush and I'm going to use a hard edge brush, anywhere that I want to add to the selection, like this part of her shoe, I make sure my foreground color is white, and as I paint, I'm adding to my selection. So let me just add this little bit, and then press Q to get out of Quick Mask, and you can see my selection has changed. Let's say now I want to get rid of this part. I'm going to make my brush smaller by using the bracket keys. I'm going to swap my colors by pressing X, because in this case I want to paint with black. And now as I do, oops, I went a little too far there, but that's okay. We can change that too. If I press Q, you can see now my selection has changed once again. So every time I want to mask something more, I paint with black. I often switch in and out of Quick Mask just to see how I'm doing. Now I've gone a little too far, so I'm going to press X again, and this lets me fine-tune it. Now I'm struggling a little bit because my brush is too small. Or I should say too big. It needs to be smaller. But now you can see how I can go in here and find all those little areas, and without even really thinking about it on the fly, I'm just pressing letter X to swap back and forth between black and white to work on this thing. So for example, over here, this part needs to be selected, so I'm painting with white. In fact, let me stop for a moment. When I say paint with white, I should make an important distinction here. Generally, I use a brush tool because I'm trying to fix up a little area. But here's an example where I can use these tools together. So if I take the magnetic lasso tool and select around this ribbon here, I've made a selection. Then you just go ahead and fill that with white because I want to select it, and that gets added into my selection. Now I can see I didn't do a great job. Well, that's okay. Now I could go back to my paintbrush with black and just do a little bit of fine-tuning. But the real point I wanted to make was I realized a while back I had a habit of saying paint with black or paint with white, which made people think that the only option in Quick Mask was to use a painting tool like a paintbrush, and that's certainly not the case. You could do this, press L for lasso, make a bad selection, hopefully a better selection than that, and then fill that with black. So again, it doesn't have to be only the painting tools. Those will be tools you'll use a fair bit, but it's also a very nice way to work by making a selection of something. So say for the sake of argument, I noticed a whole bit of the sky that wasn't properly selected. I could select that whole area and fill it. Now here's the other thing about Quick Mask that's important to note. When I was painting using a hard edge brush. That's because I wanted my selection to have a hard edge. So for example, if I paint into her leg warmer and go out of Quick Mask, you'll see it has a very definite edge. But now let's change that. Let's change our paintbrush to a soft edge brush, which I'm not recommending you would do, but just so you see the difference. Now as I do some painting around the edge, and I'm deliberately getting a little too much, you can't really see it here, but if I go to my layers palette, duplicate this layer and hide the background, you can see the area where I was working on right now has a very soft, feathery edge as compared with the hard edge of everything else. So the bottom line is you'll have to decide which kind of brush, if you're using the paintbrush, do you want a hard edge brush? Do you want a soft edge? Will it depend on the area that you're working on? Now, one last thing to mention about Quick Mask. Let's go up to this area here. Okay, not quite that far. Which has all these little fine hairs and some areas that are kind of, you can sort of see this guy and sort of see her hair. This is another area where Quick Mask can help. So I press Q for Quick Mask, and I have my paintbrush. I'm going to get a very small little brush. But here's the thing, instead of painting with white or black, I'm going to paint with gray. And the reason is this. If I paint with black, it'll completely mask those areas, and it'll look pretty artificial to see the sky completely showing through her hair where it wasn't before. If I paint with white, well, that's giving me too much. So instead what I do is I start with black, but I lower the opacity down to some number, like say around 40%. And now as I paint in here, what that's going to do is create sort of a semi-see-through selection where it's partially selected and partially not. And that can be really good for areas that are like this, where you're sort of seeing through her hair. And as I go out of Quick Mask, you can see once again it's made a partial selection. So let's again duplicate that, and just so you can see it, we'll add a layer below, and I'll fill that with some really contrasting color, so you can see now. See what's starting to happen is we're sort of seeing through. You're seeing her hair a little bit, but we're also seeing some of the background as well. Of course, we're zoomed in, so it's more obvious. So that's just another area where Quick Mask can help you. Don't always think of either black or white, which are the two main colors. Think of where gray might be an interesting possibility when you want something that I call kinda selected, kinda masked. Make gray one of your options in there. So here's where I put Quick Mask into the kind of hierarchy of where to work. I'm not going to start in Quick Mask. I mean, some people do, but I prefer not to. Personally, I use other selection tools first, and then when I think I'm getting pretty close to being finished, I go into Quick Mask A to preview and see how good a job I'm doing, and B to fine-tune it where necessary.